Morning, folks. So today's lecture is an introduction to metaethics. So as you know, metaethics is part of the ethics course. It's a little bit more abstract and a little bit more complicated than what you're used to in ethics. In fact, it's actually closer, I would say, to the philosophy part of the course. So we're going to look at that today. Now, so far, obviously you've been doing ethics, but you've been focusing on a particular kind of ethics, which is what we call normative ethics. So as you can see right here, there's more, but for our purposes, there's two kinds of ethics. You've got normative ethics on one hand, and you've got meta-ethics on the other. Normative ethics is what you've been doing so far. Normative ethics is the part of ethics that deals with the question of which actions are the good actions, right? So what are those actions that are morally good, that are morally right, perhaps? So notice that in normative ethics, we presuppose a notion of the good. So you have normative ethical theories like utilitarianism, for instance, which say that the good actions are those that maximize happiness. And of course, there's all the other ethical theories, normative ethical theories like Kantianism, natural law theory, and situation ethics. And all of those theories have different ideas of which actions are good. But again, all of those theories accept or presuppose a notion of goodness. They don't really ask themselves what it means for an action to be good. They accept the notion of good without really trying to define it or trying to elucidate it. And then they ask themselves, well, which actions are good, right? Meta-ethics is a little bit different. In meta-ethics, we don't ask ourselves which actions are good. We ask ourselves, what on earth does it mean for an action to be good? What is goodness? You see, in our sort of everyday ethical language, we use words like right, wrong, good, evil, and most of the time we don't really ask ourselves what these terms mean. We just use them intuitively, right? But of course, if you're a philosopher, you don't just want to trust your instincts, right? When you're a philosopher, you want to try and understand what the terms you use mean. You want to get to the heart of the matter. And that's why I personally think that meta-ethics is the most interesting part of the ethics course, because it goes right at the fundamentals of ethics, the most fundamental questions about goodness. What is goodness? What is right? What is wrong? And so we're going to look at three different meta-ethical theories. There's many more, but there's only three that you really need to know for the purposes of this course. So let's look at our first meta-ethical theory. It's known as naturalism. So meta-ethical naturalists believe this. They think that goodness, moral goodness, is something that you can find in nature, right? It's something that is a natural property. Something, and therefore it's observable, right? It exists in the world. I think this is a bit of a typo here. I think it's supposed to say it exists in the world as a natural property. I think that's what I was intending to write. Don't really know what happened there. The point is, goodness is something that you can see, something that you can observe. It's right there in the natural world, just like, I don't know, say mass, right, and charge. Those are natural properties that we can observe using scientific methods. So in the same way, since goodness is part of nature, according to naturalists, then to find out what is good, you need to go out there in nature and observe. And I'm going to give you an example of two sort of naturalist thinkers. The first of these is Philippa Foot. You may have heard Philippa Foot. You may have heard of her before, because I think she comes up in the part about utilitarianism. Not because she is a utilitarian. She isn't. She strongly criticizes utilitarianism. And you may remember her, I think, her trolley experiment, thought experiment, against utilitarianism. And she's a naturalist. She buys into meta-ethical naturalism. So she believes that goodness is a property that you can find in nature. And more specifically, she thinks that goodness is identical to the natural property of natural functioning. Right? So when we say that something is good, morally good, of course, we mean that that thing is functioning naturally. And she's going to give us various different examples. She's going to talk about an oak tree. Right? So what do we mean when we say that an oak tree is a good oak tree? Well, according to Philippa Foot, and in fact according to anybody, frankly, what we really mean when we say that an oak tree is a good oak tree is that it's functioning naturally. It's doing what oak trees are supposed to do based on their nature. So a good oak tree is going to have a very strong kind of trunk, and it's going to have leaves, right? And then another example she uses, although I didn't really put it here, is that of an owl. What does it mean when we say that an owl is good? Well, according to Philippa Foot, and again, according to pretty much everyone, a good owl is an owl that can see in the dark, right? Because that's what owls naturally do. That's what it means to thrive as an owl in your natural, I guess, nocturnal environment. And likewise with human beings. So a good human being is a human that functions naturally. When we say that a human is good, or that a human life is good, what we mean is that it's natural. Another way of putting this, and I think it's quite beautiful, it's a beautiful idea when you think about it, to be a good human is to be truly human, is to be, to truly fulfill your human nature. And she draws inspiration from people like Aristotle and Aquinas. You'll recall Aquinas' view in natural law, that good actions are actions that fulfill your telos. And there's definitely a link here, although Philippa Foot's an atheist. But there's a link here because Philippa Foot thinks that to be good, to be a good human, is to fulfill your human nature. So that's Philippa Foot's view. It's an interesting view, definitely worth writing about in an essay. But it has problems of its own. So here I've pointed to two problems, but they're frankly two sides of the same coin. So remember, Philippa Foot says that for an action to be good, what that means is for it to fulfill your human nature, for it to be natural. But the problem with that is that there seem to be plenty of actions which certainly fulfill, or plenty of attitudes, which certainly fulfill our human nature, but we wouldn't call them good at all. So take selfishness, for instance. I think most people would agree that selfishness is a very natural, innate human trait. It's not something that you really need to learn. It's something that we just naturally are. We have an innate disposition to be selfish, to care about ourselves more than we care about others, right? So it's very natural. It's very, most likely genetic. Almost certainly genetic, I would say. But is it good to be selfish? Is it good to have selfish attitudes? Well, certainly not, right? It seems very odd to say that selfishness is a good thing because it fulfills our human nature. So notice that goodness on one hand and fulfilling your human nature on the other seem to come apart because there are some attitudes which are natural, right? They fulfill our human nature. They're very human, but they are not good. And the other side of this coin is that there are actions that we regard as extremely moral and praiseworthy, right? But they seem to go against our nature rather than fulfill it. So take extreme acts of altruism. Take a soldier, for example, who jumps on a grenade to save his fellow soldiers, right? Now, that is morally praiseworthy, but is it natural? Not quite. If anything, it goes against all of our instincts, right? There's nothing natural about it. And in general, acts of altruism, right? It's true that there is an innate sort of natural disposition for compassion, right? We do have a natural capacity for compassion, but it's not natural to act against your own interests, right? Especially in very radical ways, like in the example that I've just given. So the moral of this story is that it seems like it's going to be a little bit difficult to define goodness in terms of fulfilling your human nature or functioning naturally as a human being. Because those two things seem like they're going to come apart. Now, there are ways of answering this, right? But if you want to figure it out, if you want to defend Philippa Foot, if you want to know more, I'd recommend checking my Padlet, because I include, for every sort of criticism of the meta-ethical theories that we're going to talk about today, I include a possible response. It's always possible to respond to criticisms, but that's for you to investigate. So, next meta-ethical theory. Oh, still naturalism, actually, but a different kind of naturalism. So this is F.H. Bradley. Like Philippa Foot, he argues that goodness is a natural property, something you can observe and see in nature, right? But he's not going to say that goodness is natural human functioning or fulfilling your human nature. He's not going to say that at all. he's going to say that goodness is identical to the property of fulfilling your social duty. So he has a more social metaethical theory. Right? So when we say that an action is good, what we really mean is it fulfills your duty in a society. Now, again, this is clearly a naturalist theory because fulfilling your social duty, I mean, that's something we can just observe, right? Something we can just see. It's very much, fulfilling your social duty is part and parcel of the natural world. When I sort of stop at the traffic light, I'm fulfilling my social duty. When I pay my taxes, I'm fulfilling my social duty. All of these things are perfectly observable, perfectly natural. But as you might expect, there's problems here too, and you probably anticipated this one. It seems that some actions may be morally good, but surely contradict our social duty. Right? I mean, take a standard case, you're in a Nazi society or some kind of authoritarian society, and it's your social duty to denounce Jews because the Nazis are hunting them. Right? So, according to F.H. Bradley's view, the good thing to do, it seems, I don't think he wouldn't want to accept this, but it seems like the logical consequence of his view is that the good thing to do is to denounce the Jews. But surely that's not right. Surely the good thing to do is to hide them and to act against your social duty. So here again, as with Philip of Foot, notice that goodness and fulfilling your social duty come apart. Right? They're not the same property. Again, there are ways of answering this. Sorry, not probably. But I would refer you to my Padlet or to your own research. Now, let's talk about a second metaethical theory. It's called intuitionism. It's put forward by people like G. Moore, especially G. Moore, but also people like Ross and Pritchard. G. Moore is the most important thinker to remember here. And here, intuitionists are going to say that actually goodness is not part of the natural world. So they're going to strongly disagree with the naturalists. They don't think that you can just see goodness. They don't think that goodness is something that you can just come across, something that's part of nature. And they're certainly not going to try and define goodness. Right? They're never going, that's a big difference between naturalists and intuitionists. Naturalists are always trying to define goodness. They're going to say, well, goodness is this. Whereas intuitionists are going to say, good is just good. Don't try and define it. Goodness is a property that is not natural. It's its own thing. It cannot be reduced to anything natural. And because goodness, according to people like Moore, is not part of the natural world, it's not something that we're going to find using the methods of science. It's not something that we're going to be able to observe. So instead of discovering goodness using observation, you're going to use intuition. That's why they're called intuitionists, because they think that the way you find out about goodness is through intuition. Let's look at G. Moore's argument. It's more of an analogy than an argument. He talks about yellow, right? And he says, when you think about a color like yellow, you can't really define it in terms of something else. If you were talking to a colorblind person, you would never really be able to communicate what yellow is to that person. You just have to show it to them. Right? But of course, this person is colorblind, so this person would never be able to know what yellow is. Yellow is just yellow. You can't define it. And Moore is going to say, well, goodness is just like that. Right? Don't try and define goodness. Whenever you try and do it, like with Philip of Foot and F.H. Bradley, whenever you try and define goodness in terms of something natural, you get problems, because then you get scenarios where, for example, denouncing Jews and therefore fulfilling your social duty towards the Nazi society is a good thing, right? Whenever you try and define goodness, you end up in weird cases where some actions which clearly seem wrong intuitively turn out to be good. So let's not try and define good in terms of anything, says G. Moore. Good is just good. So that's the second metaethical theory that you need to know about. And here are some of its problems. Oops. The first problem is the kind of the epistemology of intuitionists. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, and so in this context, an epistemology is a theory about how you come to acquire moral knowledge. And the problem with saying that you acquire moral knowledge through intuition is that intuition doesn't seem very reliable, right? If you think about it, intuition can tell us everything and its opposite. Some people feel very strongly that abortion is morally wrong. It's very intuitive to them that abortion is wrong. Others feel very strongly that abortion is a right, that everybody should be able to have an abortion. So intuitions clash, and there's no way to resolve this. If I feel very strongly that abortion is right, and you feel very strongly that abortion is wrong, we're never going to be able to agree, right? Because intuitions are contradictory, and there's just no way of settling this. Whereas if you think of observation, right, that's just something we all have access to. If we can agree that goodness is a natural human functioning, and we agree on what it means for a human to function naturally, then we can just observe a human and see if that human is functioning naturally. And we can agree this human is good or this human is bad, right? We can all observe the same thing together. But intuition doesn't work like this, right? We all have different intuitions, and it has to do with possibly our genetic makeup and how we've been brought up as well. So that's one problem. Another potential problem with GMO is just, a potential answer to GMO is simply to say, well, goodness just isn't like yellow. It's not the same kind of property, right? This is a very kind of straightforward answer. You can just say, well, look, there are good theories of what good is. You can define good. So if you're a supporter of F.H. Bradley or Philippa Foot, then you can just answer, well, I'm sorry, GMO, but I've given a definition of good, right? It's right here, and it works. Of course, you have to argue that it works. You have to answer the objections, right? But the point is, an option here is just to deny Moore's claim that good is just like yellow. Good can be defined. Now, before we move on to the third ethical theory, there's something very important to notice here. Obviously, intuitionists and naturalists don't agree on everything. But there's one thing they do agree on. They both groups believe that goodness is a real property. It's a real objective property, something that actually exists in the world, something we can find out about. In that respect, they are absolutist theories, because they think that goodness is an objective, real property in the world. The difference is, well, naturalists think that it's a property in nature, it's part of nature, and that it can be observed. Whereas intuitionists say, well, yes, it does exist, but it's not in the natural world, it's kind of abstract. Think of Plato's form of the good. And we don't find out about it through observation, we find out about it through intuition. But both are absolutist theories, which is in contrast with our final theory, emotivism. So we're going to finish with that. Emotivism is a theory that was put forward in the 20th century by people like A.J. Ayer and Stevenson. You're going to talk a lot about A.J. Ayer when you reach the part of philosophy that discusses religious language in the 20th century, but that's another story. So these people, they're going to put forward a theory called emotivism. And obviously, as you can probably tell from the name and from the picture here, emotivism is going to draw a very tight link, a tight connection between goodness and emotions. So, unlike intuitionists and unlike naturalists, emotivists are going to say that goodness isn't some property that's out there in the world that we can find out about. There is really nothing. Goodness isn't a thing that we can find out about. So they're going to radically reinterpret our ethical language. Because when I say, murder is wrong or charity is good, it really sounds like I'm talking about this thing in the world out there called goodness. And I'm saying it's not in murder, but it is in charity. But motivists think that's just an illusion, right? It's just a feature of our language. Actually, when we say that something is good or that something is wrong or bad, we don't really mean that goodness and wrongness, I guess, exist in the world. So moral claims, this is a central claim of emotivism. Moral claims, like murder is wrong or charity is good, don't describe the world. They're just expressions of emotions or attitudes. So if you're A.J. Ayer, you're going to say that it's an expression of emotion. If you're Stevenson, you're going to say that they're expressions of attitudes. They're very similar ideas, slightly different, but I'll let you look into this yourselves. For now, let's just focus on what unites Ayer and Stevenson. So, emotivism is often known as the boo-hurrah theory, because, for the following reason. According to emotivists, when I say murder is wrong, what I really mean is boo murder. I'm just expressing how I feel about murder. I'm not saying anything objective about what exists in the world. I'm just expressing how I feel, what my attitude is towards murder. And when I say charity is good, I don't mean that charity has this property called goodness. It's really just a way of saying that I love charity. It's a way of saying hurrah charity. That's why emotivism is called the boo-hurrah theory. So the bottom line is, moral claims don't describe the world, they just express emotions, right? So, yeah, so this is pretty much what I was saying earlier about naturalism and intuitionism, with the added claim that emotivism is a relativist theory, not an absolutist theory. It doesn't regard goodness as an objective thing out there. Morality is inherently subjective, according to emotivism. It has to do with our subjective attitudes and emotions. And one problem, so we're getting into problems now, we're getting to AO2 evaluation, is that on one hand, a more subjective theory of morality seems well suited for a kind of pluralist postmodern world where people have lots of different views. But it seems a little bit extreme to say that morality is entirely subjective, to say that it's purely a matter of attitude or emotion, and that it's not a matter of objective fact. I mean, some actions, like for example, torturing people for fun, clearly are objectively wrong, right? So if I say torturing people for fun is wrong, I mean that torturing people for fun is wrong. I'm not just saying that I don't like torturing people for fun, or that my attitude towards torturing people for fun is a negative one, right? So there's a problem. Relativism, again, it appeals to a lot of people because it seems more tolerant of difference. But when taken to its extreme, it doesn't seem very appealing. It seems a little bit hard to stomach, to be honest with you. Although you might disagree with that. Here's another problem with emotivism that would be useful for you to think about. It comes from a philosopher called Alasdair MacIntyre. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he's some kind of naturalist, right? A bit like Philip the Foot, except that he's Catholic, unlike Philip the Foot, who's an atheist. So he's going to say this about emotivists. He's going to say emotivism rests on a category mistake, right? Because a confusion, because emotivists have confused use and meaning. They're two different things. And here's the example he gives. Suppose I say fire, right? Now, the use of saying fire, the purpose of saying fire, is to get you out of the house, right? But the meaning of fire is that there is a fire, right? That the house is on fire. So meaning and use are two different things. Meaning is what the statement actually means, and the use is the purpose of the statement, why you're saying it, right? And MacIntyre is going to say the emotivists confuse the two. They confuse use and meaning. So the emotivists say that charity is good means hurrah charity. But MacIntyre is going to say that's not right at all. Hurrah charity is the use of charity is good. It's not the meaning of charity is good. The meaning of charity is good is that charity is good, that it's a morally good thing to do. But the purpose of saying it might be, often, to express a positive emotion or attitude towards charity, right? But use and meaning are two different things. And emotivists, according to MacIntyre, conflate the two by saying that effectively that the use of an ethical claim like charity is good is in fact its meaning. And that's pretty much it for today's crash course on metaethics. Once again, I know I've said this several times, but I think I should repeat it because it's important. There are ways, I've addressed many criticisms of those metaethical theories, and there are always ways to answer those criticisms. But I didn't address them here because I think it would be good for you to think about this yourself. And once again, my Padlet is there to help you here. I include answers, possible answers to every objection to metaethical theories, like the ones we've looked at today. Now, in terms of exam advice, most, and probably all, to be honest with you, most exam essay questions about metaethics will give you an opportunity to talk about all three of the theories, right? So the question might be, for instance, evaluate naturalism, say. But that doesn't mean you can only talk about naturalism. You can bring up the other two. And you can argue naturalism is better than the other two. Or the other two are better than naturalism. Or naturalism is better than intuitionism, but not as good as emotivism, say. The point is, you always get an opportunity, or almost always, I've yet to find a question that doesn't let you do this. You'll almost always get an opportunity to talk about all three of those theories. So, the easiest thing to do, really, is to write 3 paragraphs, and each paragraph focuses on one metaethical theory. So, for example, the first paragraph could be about naturalism, second could be about intuitionism, third could be about emotivism. And obviously you want both AO1 and AO2. So in each paragraph you're going to need AO1, so that's explaining the theory, what is naturalism, what is intuitionism, talk about the scholars as well. And in your AO2, in each paragraph you include AO2 where you explain your opinion of the theory. Is it a good theory? Is it a bad theory? If it's a bad theory, object to it, like the objections we've seen today. If it's a good theory, the best thing to do is to raise an objection, but then answer the objection. Right? But the point is, 3 paragraphs, 3 theories. And each one contains an explanation of the theory and your opinion on that theory. And if you do that in an essay, it's hard to go wrong. As long as you understand the theories, that you're actually answering the question, and that your objections and answers are good. They don't need to be that good, but they need to make sense, right? The demands of the course, the examiners are well aware that this is a difficult part of the course. So nobody's asking you to be a genius on metaethics. You just need to make sense, that's all. And that pretty much covers everything. Thank you.